I felt something was wrong in my own home, so I pretended to leave for my cabin. While I watched from across the street, my neighbor gripped my arm and whispered, "Wait until midnight. Your daughter will show you everything." When midnight came, I broke down from what I saw. I'm 63 years old. For 34 years, I worked as an insurance claims investigator, which is not the job people picture when you say it at a party. There is no trench coat. There's a rental car, a folding chair, a banker's box of statements, and a great deal of driving. Mostly, I sat across kitchen tables from people who were telling me about a fire, or a flood, or a back that would never be the same, and I listened. Here is the only thing I ever truly learned how to do. When a person tells you something that happened, the parts of the account do about the same amount of work. Nothing is load-bearing, because none of it has to hold anything up. But when a person tells you something they built, some of the parts work too hard. There is always one detail carrying more than its share of the weight. A man describes water coming through his ceiling and mentions 3 separate times that he was at his sister's. A woman walks you through a burglary and knows the brand of the pry bar. They are not lying about everything. They are lying about one thing, and then propping it up with true things until it stands. 34 years of that. I got good at it. I gave depositions in 9 civil matters. I trained adjusters half my age and told all of them the same thing. Don't listen for the lie, listen for the effort. I want that on the record before I tell you any of the rest, and not because it makes me sound like anybody worth listening to. I want it on the record because it is the reason this happened to me. When you believe you would notice, you stop looking. That is the entire mechanism. You quietly hand your own attention over to a reputation you have with yourself, and then you go about your life. Every scheme I ever unwound had some version of that sitting in the middle of it. A bookkeeper of 30 years, a father-in-law who'd built the company from a garage, somebody standing in the wreckage saying, "I would have seen it. I would have seen it." I said that sentence to myself in one form or another for 8 months. My wife died 4 years ago in March. 14 months from the appointment where they told us to the morning, I sat in a chair beside her bed and watched the room get very quiet. We bought the house in 1994 when our daughter was 3. 4 bedrooms and just under an acre, more house than we could afford at the time. And my wife walked through it once and said this one, and that was the end of the discussion. She painted the kitchen twice because the first yellow was wrong in the afternoon light. After she was gone, the house stopped being a place I lived and became a place I maintained. I mowed. I changed the furnace filter. I did not move anything. Her reading glasses stayed on the side table by her chair, folded, where she'd set them down. It sounds sentimental when I write it out. It wasn't, particularly. It was that moving them would have been a decision, and I did not feel qualified to make decisions in that house anymore. My daughter called in March, 4 years later, almost to the week. Her husband had been let go in a reorganization, project management, the kind of job where they thank you in an email and give you until Friday. Their lease was eating what savings they had. She got maybe 2/3 of the way into the ask before I said yes. 6 months, Dad, tops, just until he lands something. I told her to take as long as she needed. I meant it. I had 4 bedrooms and no reason for any of them. They moved in on a Saturday. He backed the rental truck up the driveway and took out the mailbox post, doing it, and spent the next 2 hours resetting it in concrete without being asked, and would not let me help. She stood in the kitchen with her hands on the counter and looked at the yellow paint for a long moment and didn't say anything about it, and I thought, good, somebody should be in here. I want to be honest about the first stretch, because it would be easier to tell this if the whole thing had felt wrong from the start. It didn't. She cooked 4 nights a week. She reorganized the pantry, which I had let go completely, and labeled the shelves in that neat block printing she has had since she was 9. He fixed the fence section that had been leaning since before the funeral. We watched games together on Sunday. He is not a talker, and neither am I, and there is a specific comfort in sitting in a room with another quiet man and letting the television do the work. For the first time in 4 years, the house made noise. Somebody ran water upstairs at 7 in the morning. Somebody left a coffee cup in the sink. Those are not small things when you have spent 4 years listening to a furnace cycle. I was grateful. That is the part I keep having to say out loud, because people hear this story and assume I must have been uneasy the whole time, keeping some professional distance. I wasn't. I was grateful, and I was not paying attention, and those two things were the same thing. The first wrongness was the pills. I take a blood pressure medication, 1 tablet mornings. It lives on the second shelf of the cabinet to the left of the sink, beside the vitamins my wife bought me in 2016 that I still have not finished. Second shelf, that cabinet, for 11 years. I don't think about it any more than I think about which pocket my keys go in. One morning in June, the bottle was not there. I stood in front of that open cabinet longer than I want to admit. Then I found it in the drawer at the end of the counter, the one with the takeout menus and the dead batteries and the church directory from a parish we left in 2009. Here is what happens next, and I want to describe it carefully, because it is the entire trick, and I walked straight into it. You do not think, someone moved this. You think, when did I move this? You go looking through your own recent past for the moment you must have done it, and your recent past is not a filing cabinet, it's a fog, the way everybody's is. And somewhere behind that, quieter, is a second question you don't say out loud. It goes, is this how it starts? I'm 63. My father spent the last 4 years of his life in a facility outside the city, and the first sign, the very first one, was that he put his wallet in the refrigerator and then argued with my mother about it. I was 29 and I remember thinking he was being stubborn. He wasn't being stubborn. He was frightened. mind, and the way that fear comes out of a proud man is as an argument. So when I stood there in my kitchen holding a pill bottle that had walked 11 feet on its own, I did not think about my daughter at all. I thought about my father, and then I did the arithmetic every man my age does in that situation, which is the wrong arithmetic entirely, and I put the bottle back on the second shelf and made my coffee and did not mention it to anybody. That is the design. That is the whole design, and it is elegant, and I have to hand it to whoever thought of it. You don't need to hide anything from a man in his 60s. You only need to move it and let him do the rest of the work himself. 2 days later, my reading glasses were in the drawer under the microwave. I laughed at that one, actually. Told myself I'd been carrying them around while I made lunch. The following week, the remote turned up in the refrigerator door, standing upright in the shelf where the ketchup goes. That one I did not laugh at. That one is my father's wallet, and I stood there in the cold light of an open refrigerator at 11 at night and felt something go loose in my chest. I did not tell my daughter. I want to be clear about why. It was not suspicion. It was the opposite of suspicion. It was that she had just gotten her life hacked into my spare rooms, and I did not want to be a thing she had to manage. I did not want to be the reason she couldn't leave in 6 months, so I said nothing, and I put the remote back on the arm of the chair, and I started, without admitting to myself that I was doing it, to keep track. The stove was in July. I came downstairs at 6 on a Tuesday morning, and the front left burner was clicking. Not lit, clicking. That dry, rapid tick a gas range makes when the igniter is going and the knob is turned just past the detent without catching. There was nothing on the burner. The kitchen smelled faintly of gas, not badly, but enough. I shut it off and opened the window over the sink and stood there while the room cleared. Then I went through my own night the way I'd go through a claimant's. Had I made tea? No. I'd gone up at 10 with a book. Had I come down once for water around midnight, and I had not gone near the range. Was the knob loose? I checked it. It turned with a little more play than the others, which meant nothing on a range that age. I could not close the loop, and an unclosed loop is the only thing in my professional life that has ever kept me awake. At breakfast, I mentioned it. Not as an accusation, as a household item. Somebody left the front burner on last night. We should all watch that. My daughter looked up from her phone with real concern and said, "Dad, that's dangerous. Did you use it?" I said I didn't think I had. She said, "Well, if you're not sure, maybe we should get one of those covers." Her husband was standing at the counter with his back to us, and he did not turn around, and he did not say anything. And I noticed that and filed it and drew no conclusion from it, because at that point, I had no shape for the thing to fit into. The mail started in August. I have a system, which is not a system so much as a groove worn by 34 years of paper. Mail gets opened at the kitchen table with a letter opener that was my father's, gets read, gets stacked. Statements go in the desk. Junk goes out. The basket by the front door is for outgoing. In August, I found a bank statement in that basket, sealed, addressed to me, postmarked 10 days earlier. I had opened it. I remembered opening it. I remembered the balance and thinking the escrow adjustment had gone through. I turned it over and looked at the flap the way I have looked at 1,000 documents. The adhesive had been reactivated. There's a particular puckering along the seal line, a slight cloudiness, and if you catch it in raking light, you can see where the paper fibers lifted the first time. I had written that exact observation in reports. I had explained it to juries. I sat at my own kitchen table with my father's letter opener in my hand and looked at an envelope that had been opened and resealed and put back where an unopened envelope would go, and I still did not arrive at the answer. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I had it in my hand. What I thought was mail fraud, somebody outside. There'd been a rash of box thefts 2 streets over the previous winter, and I thought, they're pulling mail, they're checking for account numbers, they're putting back what they don't want. It was a coherent theory. It was even a theory I had professional experience with. It just required the mail to have been resealed outside this house and put back inside it. I did not think that through. I have gone over that moment more times than any other in the whole 8 months. I had the anomaly, I had the correct read on the physical evidence, and I built a story around it that let everyone I loved stay outside the frame. I started the list in the last week of August. Not dramatically. I did not sit down and decide to open a file on my own family. What happened is that I have a yellow legal pad in the second drawer of the desk in the office off the living room, and I have had a yellow legal pad in that drawer since 1991, and one evening I wrote a date at the top of a fresh sheet, and under it, in the shorthand I've used my whole working life, 3 words about a burner. That is what 34 years does to a man. It is not vigilance. It is a groove. When something doesn't resolve, my hand reaches for a pad the way another man's reaches for a cigarette. Over the next 6 weeks, that page filled up, and I want to give you it the way it read, because the shape of it matters more than any single line. Pills, second shelf to menu drawer, glasses, side table to microwave drawer, remote, refrigerator, front burner, 6 a.m., unlit, gas present, statement, resealed, put in outgoing basket, furnace filter. I know I changed in June, dated May in my own handwriting on the frame. Checkbook, second drawer to third. A voicemail from my own dentist confirming an appointment I had not made for a Tuesday. And when I called them back, the woman on the phone said very kindly that a family member had called to schedule it for me, and I said of course thank you, and hung up and sat in my truck in a parking lot for 11 minutes. 21 entries by the second week of October, dates and times, because that is how I have written every note I have ever taken. I never once wrote down what I thought any of it meant. That's the thing. 21 entries and not a single conclusion, because a conclusion would have required me to write a name. The garage was the 15th of October. I'd gone to the hardware store for a hose fitting and come back 40 minutes early, and when I came up the driveway, the side door of the garage was standing open, which it never is. I went in through it. She was sitting on an overturned crate with 3 of the storage boxes open around her, the ones I'd carried out there the winter after the funeral, when I could not have them in the house and could not throw them away. The tape had been cut on all 3. She had a stack of papers on her knee. She said, "Hey," before I'd said anything. Then, "I'm looking for Mom's recipe cards, the lemon thing she did at Thanksgiving." I said the recipe cards are in the kitchen, in the tin on top of the refrigerator, which they were, which they have been since 1994. She said, "Oh," and laughed at herself and started putting things back in the box. I stood there in the doorway for a second longer than was comfortable, and I looked at what was on her knee, and it was our closing packet from 1994, the deed of trust, the survey, the plat map with the lot lines, a carbon of the title policy, 200 pages of the most boring paper in the world, and she had it out on her knee in a garage looking for lemon cake. She carried the box back to the shelf and kissed my cheek on the way past, and said, "The garage smells like a garage, Dad," and went inside. I stood out there another 5 minutes. Then I went in, and I got the tin down off the refrigerator, and I set it on the counter where she'd see it, and I did not say one word about it. That night, I wrote the 22nd entry on the pad, and for the first time in 6 weeks, my hand hesitated over the page, because the honest entry would have had to include who. The dinner was 2 nights later. She made the chicken thing with the mustard. He poured iced tea. We talked about whether the college up the road was ever going to fix the interchange, and about a hiking trail he'd read about, and about nothing, comfortably for 20 minutes. Then she set her fork down and said, "Dad, have you thought at all about what you want to do with the house? Long term, I mean." I said, "Long term." She said, "You're rattling around in a lot of square footage, and the market here is not going to sit still forever." I'm not saying anything. I just think it's the kind of thing you want to have thought about before you have to think about it. I said I'd keep that in mind. And she said, and this is the sentence, she said, "I just don't want you to have to make a big decision on a bad day." Her husband did not look up from his plate the entire time, not once. He ate like a man being sentenced. Later, I was rinsing dishes, and he came in with the tea pitcher and stood next to me at the sink for a while. Then he said, without any let-in, "Sir, if you ever need anything, you can call me. Anytime. I mean that." I said, "I know that, son." He said, "I know you do." He put the pitcher in the fridge. He said, "I just wanted to say it out loud." And then he went upstairs. I did what I would have done for a client. I pulled my own credit that week, all 3 bureaus, clean. No new accounts, no inquiries I couldn't source. I called the county recorder and had them read me the current instrument on my parcel and confirm no conveyance, no lien, no lis pendens, clean. I went through 14 months of bank and brokerage statements line by line with a ruler, because that is how you actually do it, and I found nothing. Not $1, not a small test transaction, not a rounding skim, not a duplicated ACH, nothing. That should have relieved me. It did the opposite, because absence of theft in a house where paper is moving means the paper is the point. I found it on a Thursday in the recycling bin in the garage, which I want to be honest about. I went through my own recycling bin, 63 years old, standing in my own garage at 9 at night, going through paper with a flashlight in my teeth. 2 things were in there, folded together. The first was a comparative market analysis. 12 pages, my address on the cover, 4 comps in a half-mile radius, a suggested list price of $895,000, prepared by a brokerage in the next county over and dated the last week of September. The second was a durable power of attorney form, printed, standard state form, the kind any office supply store sells and any bank will honor. My full legal name typed into the principal line, her full legal name typed into the agent line, blank everywhere else. No signatures, no notary block filled, no date. I stood in that garage with those 2 pieces of paper in my hands, and everything I had written on that legal pad for 6 weeks rearranged itself in about 4 seconds, and it made a picture. And the picture was so clean and so complete that I never questioned it again. They were going to sell the house out from under me. I did not confront anybody. I want to be plain about that, because people always ask why not, and the answer is that I have spent my whole life watching what confrontation does to evidence. You confront a man on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday the file is shredded, the account is closed, the witness has been coached, and the only thing you have accomplished is telling the other side exactly how much you know. Every case I ever lost, I lost because somebody senior to me could not wait, so I did what I have done 100 times. I went and got a professional, and I built the box before I mentioned the box. The attorney I found specialized in real property and elder financial exploitation, which is a phrase I typed into a search bar at 2 in the morning and then sat looking at for a while. Her office was above a bakery. She listened to me for 50 minutes without writing anything, and then wrote for 9 minutes straight. She told me a durable power of attorney is the most dangerous piece of paper in American life. Not the deed, the power of attorney. A deed transfers one thing. A power of attorney transfers you. With a signed and notarized general durable POA, an agent can list a property, sign the closing documents, wire the proceeds, open and close accounts, and change beneficiaries. And every institution in the chain will cooperate cheerfully because the document tells them to. She asked whether I'd signed anything unusual in the past year. Anything with a notary present. Anything at a bank, a dealership, a doctor's office, a title company. I said no. She said think harder. It's very often bundled. People sign a stack of 11 pages, and the 9th 9th page is the one that matters. I thought harder, and I could not swear to it. That is what got me. 34 years of documents, and I sat in a lawyer's office and could not swear to what I had signed in the last 12 months because nobody can, and that is precisely why the mechanism works. We did 4 things that week. She recorded a deed of trust against the property in my own favor, which put an encumbrance on the title. No buyer would touch the parcel without a written release signed by me in person. She said, "You'll pay a lawyer $3,000 to clean this up someday." I said, "Fine." She sent a letter to my bank and my brokerage placing a verbal instruction freeze on both. Any transaction over $5,000, any address or beneficiary change, any new signer required me physically present with photo identification. No phone, no email, no agent. She filed a notarized affidavit with the county recorder stating that I had executed no power of attorney, general or limited, durable or springing, in the preceding 12 months, and revoking any instrument purporting to be one. And she opened a file with a case number on it and put my legal pad in it. I drove home that Friday afternoon feeling, for the first time since June, competent. That is the only word for it. I had found the thing. I had understood the thing. And I had put a wall in front of the thing before anybody knew I'd seen it. I had built the trap, and they were already standing inside it and had no idea. I want to be fair to the man I was that afternoon. Everything he did was correct. He had simply protected the wrong thing. It should have ended there. That is what I mean when I say the false bottom held. For about 9 days, I lived like a man who had solved something. I slept. I stopped writing on the pad. I was pleasant at dinner. Twice, I caught myself feeling sorry for her, which is a strange thing to say about your own child. I sat across the table from a woman I believed was going to be quietly humiliated by a title company in a few weeks, and I felt sorry for her. Then the small things started not adding up in a different direction, and this time I did not have anywhere comfortable to put them. The first was the man in the black sedan. My neighbor had mentioned him back in September, standing at the fence with a tomato in each hand. She said, "You've got somebody coming around midweek." I said, "Probably the insurance," and that was the whole exchange. But a theory makes you go back and pick things up again. So I went and asked her. She was 73 years old, 30 years an oncology nurse before she retired, 22 of them in the house directly across the street. She and my wife traded seedlings every spring for 2 decades, and every May there was a negotiation on the sidewalk both of them pretended was serious. After the funeral, she brought a casserole every Wednesday for 2 months and never once asked for the dish back, which is its own kind of intelligence about people. I asked her about the sedan, and she went in the house and came back out with a spiral notebook. 3 visits, 2 in September, 1 the first week of October, each one midweek, each one in the early afternoon, each one under an hour. She had start and end times, to the minute, in a nurse's handwriting. She had the plate, and she said, "That man's never carried a folder in." I said, "What does he carry?" She said, "A clipboard and a leather case, but he never opens it on the porch, and he doesn't sit down in there. I can see the front room from my kitchen window, and he doesn't sit down. He walks around." I stood at that fence, and something started to slide. A listing agent does not visit a house 3 times in 5 weeks without a sign going in the yard. There is no version of that. The whole business model is the sign. There had been no sign, no lockbox on my door, no photographer, no cleaning crew. I had handled property claims for 3 decades. I know what it looks like when a house is being prepared for sale, and my house did not look like that in any particular. And then the second thing, which I had been walking past for 9 days, the power of attorney form in the recycling bin was blank. Think about that for 1 minute. If you are forging your father's signature, you fill the form out. That is the point of the form. A blank POA with 2 names typed in is not an instrument. It is a rehearsal. It means that as of the last week of September, they still did not have what they needed from me and did not have a way to take it, which raises a question I did not want to ask. If they could not get my signature and they were not selling the house, then what were they collecting instead? I already had the answer. It was 22 entries long in my own handwriting in the second drawer of the desk in the office off the living room. I just could not see it yet. I decided on a Sunday and I moved on a Friday, and in between I did the most useful thing I know how to do, which is nothing at all visibly. You cannot investigate a house you are living in. You are a variable in it. Every time I walked into a room, whatever was going to happen in that room stopped happening. To know what my house was like without me in it, I had to not be in it, and I had to be believed. So I built a departure. I have a cabin 4 hours north, 2 rooms on a lease lot we bought in 2003, and that I have not been able to make myself sell. I go up 2 or 3 times a year. Everyone in my family knows this. It is, in the language of the work, an established pattern, and an established pattern is the only lie nobody checks. I announced it over coffee on Wednesday, in the middle of a sentence about something else, which is how people actually announce things they are not thinking hard about. I said the color ought to be peaking up there by the weekend, and I might run up Friday and stay through. My daughter looked up from her phone. There was something on her face for less than a second. I have watched 10,000 faces receive information across a table, and I know what it looks like when a person has to move a piece before they can react. It is not guilt, it is arithmetic. Then it was gone, and she smiled and said, "That sounds so good, Dad. You never take anything for yourself." Her husband said, "Absolutely, you should go," and he said it half a beat late. Thursday, I did every single thing a man leaving for a week does, and I did them where they could be seen. I took the cooler out of the basement and washed it in the driveway. I stopped the mail and left the confirmation email open on the kitchen computer. I called about about the water heater at the cabin out loud from the living room. I put the rods in the truck bed at 3 in the afternoon with the garage door up. Friday morning, I loaded the duffel and I stood in the driveway and took a photograph of the rods in the bed and sent it to her, and I typed, "Heading out. Back Thursday, probably." She sent back a heart. What I also put in the truck, under the sleeping bag on the back seat, was a pair of 10 by 42 binoculars, a digital voice recorder, a fresh legal pad, a phone charger, and the camera I had carried for work for 11 years before they issued us phones that were better. I drove north out of the county on the state route because that is the way I always go. I stopped at a diner at the 40-mile mark and bought a coffee I did not drink, and I sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes with my hands on the wheel. Then I turned around and drove back into my own life with my headlights on in the middle of the afternoon like everybody else. There is a motor inn 12 miles from my house. 1 story, 22 doors, a hand-lettered sign about the ice machine. It still takes cash at the desk and does not care what you write on the card. I paid for 4 nights. Room 114, ground floor, around the back where the truck would not be visible from the road. The clerk was watching a game and did not look at me twice. I sat on the end of the bed with the curtains shut and the room smelling like carpet cleaner. And at 6:30, I called my neighbor. She picked up on the second ring. I got about 2 sentences in. I said her name and I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not repeat it, and I need you to understand I am not entirely sure what I'm asking." And she said, "I know. I've been keeping track. For 6 weeks, I had been the only person on earth who knew there was something wrong in my house, and I had carried it alone precisely because saying it out loud would have made me the kind of man who says things like that." A 73-year-old woman across the street said 4 words and put it down. She had the notebook out already. She read me the whole thing. 3 visits from the sedan with dates, arrival, and departure times, then more. My daughter's car leaving at 9:40 on 4 separate mornings and returning inside 2 hours, always midweek, always the same window. And on the 9th of October, a young man with a camera who spent 11 minutes photographing the outside of my house from the sidewalk and then got in a car and left. I said, "Photographing the house." She said, "The outside, the porch." He took a lot of the porch steps. I have a loose board on the second porch step, has been loose for 2 years. I step over it without thinking about it, the way you do. She said something else then, and she said it slowly, the way a nurse tells you a result. She said, 3 weeks ago she came over to the fence when I was cutting back the hostas. She was very warm. She asked about my grandson, and then she asked me. She said it like it was nothing. She asked me whether I'd noticed you getting confused lately. I did not say anything. She said, I told her no. I said, your father is the sharpest man on this street. And she said, and honey, the thing is, she didn't like that answer. She stood there for a second, and she said, well, you don't see him every day. I sat in room 114 with the phone against my ear and the television off, and I felt the floor of the entire thing move about 4 inches to the left. She said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be across the street tonight. And she said, I thought you might. Come to my back door at 9 and don't park on this block. The house next to mine had been on the market since the first week of August. A couple transferred out of state, priced at $12,000 over what the block would bear and would not come down. 10 weeks empty, a lockbox on the door and a sign in the yard going gray. I knew the code, not because I am clever, not because the brokerage that listed it lists half of this side of town, and every one of their boxes on this street that year used the same 4-digit prefix with the last 2 digits of the house number after it. I watched an agent open 1-2 doors down in July while I was pulling weeds, and I have never once been able to unsee a number. I parked 3 blocks over near the church and walked in through the October dark. Inside it smelled like dust and dried latex paint and nothing else, which is what an empty house smells like when the water has been shut off. I did not turn on any lights. I went up the stairs on the outside edges of the treads and found the front bedroom, which was bare down to the tack strip and which has a window with a clean sightline across 40 feet of grass to my own front porch. My house was lit up like a holiday. Both cars in the driveway, living room lamps, kitchen over-counter, the upstairs hall. I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall beside the window, and I raised the binoculars, and I looked into my own living room from the outside for the first time in 31 years. She was on the phone, pacing, not agitated, the pacing of somebody working through a checklist. He was on the couch with his forearms on his knees, not watching television, not looking at a phone, just sitting the way men sit in waiting rooms. I have seen that posture across 100 conference tables. It is not the posture of a person running something. It is the posture of a person who agreed to something a while back and has been unable to find the door since. At 10:15, I heard the front door of the empty house open downstairs and my whole body went cold. And then there were footsteps on the stairs that were not trying to be quiet. She came in with a thermos, 2 paper cups, a sleeve of crackers, and a folding chair under her arm. 73 years old, in a barn coat, carrying her own chair. She set the chair up 2 feet back from the window at an angle, out of the light, which is exactly where you would put it if you had thought about it. And I said, you've done this before. She said, I sat with dying people for 30 years. I know how to wait in a dark room. She poured the coffee. She opened the notebook on her knee. And then she said, he's coming tonight. I said, how do you know that? She said, because she washed the front windows this afternoon. We waited an hour and 40 minutes, and she talked for most of it, quietly, without ever taking her eyes off the street. She told me my wife used to come over on Tuesday mornings for coffee and complain about me in a way that made it clear she was bragging. She told me her grandson had started saying no in complete sentences. None of it was small talk. I understood what she was doing. She was keeping a man's hands warm. At 11:20, she said, "Can I say something you won't like?" I said, "Go ahead." She said, "Whatever we see tonight, you're going to want to walk across that street, and you can't. Because the second you're in that house, it stops being a thing that happened and starts being a thing between the two of you." I said, "I know." She said, "I know you know. I'm saying it out loud so it's in the room." At 11:38, the street was empty. At 11:40, there were headlights at the corner, slow, and she reached over without looking and put her hand around my forearm and gripped it hard enough that I felt it the next day, and she said, "There." The sedan came up the street slow, turned into my driveway, and cut its engine and its lights at the same time, which nobody does by accident. He got out. Dark suit, no tie, late 40s, a soft leather case in his left hand, and a clipboard under his right arm. He stood by the car for a second and looked both ways down the street, not nervously, just the way a man looks who has decided in advance to look. And then he went up my walk. He never made it to the door. It opened while he was still on the second step, and I watched him step over the loose board without breaking stride, and that is when my throat closed. Because to know that board is loose, you have to have been told. She let him in. The door shut. I put the binoculars up, and my hands were not steady, and I braced my elbows on the windowsill the way I would have told any young investigator to do. They did not sit down. They went through the house together, room to room, and she was pointing. That is what I could not process at first. There was no table, no folder, no papers spread out, no negotiation. It was a walkthrough. She would stop in a doorway and gesture at something, and he would look at it, and then he would write on the clipboard, and then they would move. The living room, the hall, the kitchen, back through the living room, up out of sight for 4 minutes, down again, and then she went to work. She opened the cabinet to the left of the sink, took my pill bottle off the second shelf, unscrewed the cap, and poured it into the disposal. Then she set the empty bottle on the counter next to the coffee maker, angled it, stepped back, and moved it 2 inches. He wrote on the clipboard. She went to the range and reached behind it and did something to the front left knob with both hands, and then turned the knob a quarter turn and left it there. He wrote on the clipboard. She took my keys off the hook by the back door and dropped them behind the cushion of the reading chair, and then she leaned over and adjusted them until one corner of the fob was showing above the seam, because a thing that is completely hidden is lost, and a thing that is barely showing is confusion. He wrote on the clipboard. She carried the basket in from the front hall and turned it over in the middle of my living room floor and let 2 weeks of mail fan out across the rug, and she did not scatter it dramatically. She just dumped it and left it, and then she stood back with her arms folded and looked at it the way a woman looks at a table she has finished setting. She went to the side table by my wife's chair, picked up the reading glasses, carried them into the kitchen, and put them in the freezer. She took the framed photograph off the mantel, the two of us at the lake in 1998, her mother laughing at something out of frame, and laid it face down. And then she walked into the office off the living room, and she opened the second drawer of my desk, and she took out my yellow legal pad, and she carried it back into the living room and laid it open under the lamp on the side table with the pen across it. 22 entries, dates and times, pills, glasses, remote in the refrigerator, burner at 6 in the morning, all of it in my handwriting. He came over and stood under that lamp and read it for a long time, and then he wrote on the clipboard longer than he had written for anything else. Her husband was in the hallway the entire time with his back against the wall and his hands at his sides. He did not help. He did not stop her. Twice he looked toward the front door. They were 40 minutes. At 12:31, the two of them came to the porch, and he shook her hand, and my neighbor had the window beside us open 2 inches, and the October air brought it across 40 feet of grass as clean as if I were standing on the step. He said the file was thorough, and that he'd want one more visit before the filing date to close out the timeline. She said it would be there. He said, "And you're comfortable with the hearing date?" She said, "I'm comfortable. The filing date, the hearing date." There is no hearing date on the sale of a house. She had not filed anything against the house. She had filed against me. 3 weeks earlier, in the county I had lived in for 31 years, my daughter had petitioned the court to have me declared incapacitated and to have herself appointed guardian of my person and my estate, and the man on my porch with the clipboard was not a buyer or a broker, but the independent evaluator whose written report the court would rely on, and I had watched her spend 40 minutes manufacturing every single thing he was there to observe. And on the side table, under the lamp, open to page 1, was the evidence in my own handwriting. 8 months of things I could not explain, dated and timed, kept by a man who had spent 34 years being told documentation is the only thing that saves you. I had been keeping her file for her since August. I do not know how long I sat on the floor of that empty bedroom. The sedan left. The lights in my house went off one at a time, kitchen, living room, hall, upstairs, and I watched my own house go dark from the outside. At some point, she took the binoculars out of my hands because I was still holding them up at nothing. She did not say it's going to be all right. She put her hand flat on my back between the shoulder blades and left it there. And after a while, she said, "You have until the hearing. Get up." I got up. I was at the attorney's office at 7:40 the next morning, on the step outside the bakery, and I handed her a phone with 41 minutes of audio on it and a retired nurse's spiral notebook and told her what I had watched through a window. She pulled the case that same morning. It was public record. It had been sitting in the clerk's office for 3 weeks, and nobody is required to tell you. Petition for appointment of guardian of the person and estate of an alleged incapacitated adult. Petitioner, my daughter. Attached, a physician's letter daughter from a walk-in clinic in the next county, based on a 15-minute visit I made in July for a sinus infection, in which a doctor who had met me once checked a box about orientation. Attached, a proposed order granting the petitioner authority over my residence, my accounts, my medical decisions, and my mail. And attached, as Exhibit A, a dated list of incidents: medication found in a kitchen drawer, eyeglasses in the freezer, television remote in the refrigerator, gas range left on, unlit in the early morning hours, confusion regarding mail, failure to recall changing a furnace filter, a dental appointment forgotten, keys lost in the residence, 22 incidents. My attorney read that page and looked up at me and said, "This is your legal pad." I said, "That is my legal pad." She said, "How would she have it?" I said, "Second drawer of the desk in the office off the living room, in the house she has lived in for 8 months. Then my attorney got very quiet, put my neighbor's notebook next to Exhibit A, and went down them both line by line. Every incident on that list occurred in the house. Every one. Not one was witnessed at a store, a bank, a church, a doctor's office, by a friend, by a neighbor, by anyone. 22 allegations of a man's decline, every one of them inside the only place in the world where the petitioner controlled every object, and the dates. My neighbor had my daughter's car in the driveway for all 22. That is what filings do. A story you tell out loud can move. A story you file has to hold still, and once it is holding still, you can put a ruler on it. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in a third-floor courtroom that seats about 40 people and had 9 in it. My attorney did not open with the recording. I would have. She is better than I am. She opened by asking the court to take judicial notice of the petition's own Exhibit A, and then asked one question of the evaluator, who was on the stand in the same dark suit, holding the same soft leather case. She asked him to describe the conditions under which he made his observations of the residence. He described a home visit, disorganized correspondence on the living room floor, a medication bottle empty on the counter, a gas range with a burner in the open position, eyeglasses recovered from a freezer. He was careful and professional, and had clearly done this many times, and he read from his clipboard notes and gave the date and the time. She asked him whether the petitioner had been present during the observations. He said she had. She asked him whether the petitioner had directed his attention to specific items. He said, in the manner of a man hearing his own footsteps behind him, that she had assisted. Then my attorney put the audio in. 40 feet of October air, an open window, a porch, and a man's voice saying he'd want one more visit before the filing date to close out the timeline, and a woman's voice saying it would be there. The judge asked to hear it again. They played it again. Then my attorney handed up a spiral notebook and asked the court to compare 22 dates. The guardian ad litem, a court-appointed attorney assigned to represent my interests, who until that morning had been reading a petition and a doctor's checkbox and forming an opinion, asked for a recess and did not sit back down on the same side of the room. My son-in-law testified after lunch. Nobody subpoenaed him. He had called my attorney's office on his own the previous Monday and said he wanted to give a statement while he still could. And when they asked him why now, he said, "Because he told me I could call him any time and I never did." He was on the stand 11 minutes. He was asked when the incidents began. He said August. He was asked what happened in August. He said that was when the list started. The judge dismissed the petition from the bench. Then she said that a petition for guardianship is an application to take a citizen's life out of his hands, that this court would be referring the matter, and she read the 22 dates aloud into the record, one at a time, slowly, with the year, the way you read something you want a transcript to carry. My daughter sat 4 feet from me through all of it and never turned her head, and when the judge finished the last date, she finally looked over. I have thought about what was on her face for a long time, and I still cannot name it. It was not shame. It was recalculation. It was a woman going back through 8 months and finding in every room a man who had been standing right there, writing it down.